Oh, wow. Thank you, Tom. Really impressive presentation. I hope everyone would agree with me. And now it's time for questions. And I'm going to be moderator helping you to handle the questions. And I see the hand number 1, John Cummins. Please, John, unmute yourself.
Hello, Tom. Thanks for a great presentation. I thought it was absolutely terrific. And I don't know, I never made so many notes during a presentation as I had for this one. So that says something. I thought it was really good. I love the passion. And I love the, the care that you did the presentation with. And what is Canada? That's a question I've thought about a lot. I think it's a vessel that holds all these different points of views, different cultures. And I hope what Canada does is allow you to be whoever you want to be. It doesn't impose an identity on you. I think the States does. And it allows you to get rid of the crap that you bring to the country and take all the good that you see in the country forward. And that's why it's an evolving country and an evolving place. I love the place. Thanks, Tom.
Tom, are you going to comment or are we going to?
Yeah, I mean, I say that's, thank you. I mean, I too believe it's evolving. To give you guys a context, real briefly, in 1979, I know it's fast forward, we had a prime minister called Joe Clark who came in, and the previous prime minister, Pierre Trudeau, resigned, and Joe Clark says, I'm gonna govern as if it's a monopoly, as if I have a majority government. He put forward something called the National Energy Program, NEP, and many people said, oh my God, and here we are, some 50 years later, we're talking about, close to 50 years later, we're talking about, oh my God, we're creating a national strategy for oil. And then the people of Canada did not like that. He got voted outside by Bob Rae. It's kind of interesting, who was in federal government at the time. And then Mr. Trudeau won the election, came back and formed under one condition, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that said that every Canadian, regardless of sex, age, creed, income, socioeconomic background, color of their skin, where their education is going to be, are equal. And that equality that evolved and also created the notwithstanding clause, of which Quebec never signed on to, ladies and gentlemen. So the 1981 Canada Act was never signed on by Quebec, which is why there's been 2 attempts to bring Quebec back into our Canada under that Constitution Act or Canada Act. And we are continually evolving, which is why we have First Minister comments. We're going from there. And what is Canada? If people don't have a sense of our history, we tend to make mistakes of what history is going to be. So yeah, I'm there. I'm very, very concerned about our sovereignty. I too agree that we are evolving and that we don't have a directorship. But the fact that we're having such a transition, the biggest transition in Canadian history, is I'm hoping that we are all kind of prepared and that we make sure that people understand our short history and our way of life, and that when governance starts to go rogue, that there is accountability. So thank God our courts, hopefully our court system stays strong and that we follow our process. So there you go. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. I see hand of Henry. Did you raise the hand, Sherman, or you just change your mind? Anyway, Henry, go ahead.
Okay. I have a question. Please excuse my ignorance. Federal government has no money, as far as I understand. All money come from provinces. Federal government makes a decision with respect with a foreign aid. It could be millions, billions, whatever. Amount is unlimited. Can the province refuse contribution to this foreign aid just indicating that I don't know, province can disagree with this, and can province refuse to contribute to the foreign aid?
Okay, to answer the question, it's actually a really, really good question. So the federal government gets to handle all jurisdiction of national matters. And foreign aid is a national or an international event. And as a result of that, they have what's called jurisdiction over that. Also, taxes first really came in 1917. And then after 1917, the provinces delegated taxation principles back to the federal government on the condition that they would receive monies in the future should they be working with the federal guidelines. So that's where they get what's called transfer payments. And those transfer payments, they go from there. And I'll give you a little example of that. It gives you a little context. In 1995, we had a finance minister called Paul Martin. And Paul Martin went to the United States to say, hey, you know what? We need to borrow some money because we have a debt in Canada and we're not funding it nationally. And we need to borrow from foreigners. And in 1995, papers were very, very common. There's a front page of the local paper. It was called the Wall Street Journal, still around. But Canada is the richest third world peso. And the Mexican peso crisis had just finished, where the devaluation of the Mexican currency evolved. And what happened is the bondholders in the United States did not give Canada any money. Paul Martin flew back to Canada on his Canada Air jet and said, oh my God, we have no money to pay salaries. We have no money to keep things going. So he immediately put forward a 10% reduction across the board of all departments, including transfer payments. And when he made a reduction of 10% to transfer payments to places like Ontario, the Premier of Ontario, called Mike Harris, was now underfunded by billions of dollars. And what do? You have no money. It's gone. We're in a recession. And what happened in 1992, Bob Rae, the previous premier, put forward what's called the social contract and tried to work collaboratively. And the premier in 1996 said, I'm not going to work collaboratively because nobody wants to work with me. So he started selling off assets like the 407 in 1999, eventually sold. And then also reduced the size of government, called the common sense revolution. So to answer your question, the federal government has jurisdiction and ultimate power, and the provinces cannot challenge that power under that guideline. So when the federal government makes a decision to do something internationally, the provinces do not have veto power or say. They can privately say, Mr. Premier, what are you doing? And the electorate can say, we're not happy at election time, but at the time, nothing can be done. They made the decision, especially in a majority government.
So basically, federal government has accumulated about $1 trillion deficit, which is going to be paid by the provinces eventually.
The federal government has the most taxing power. They can tax income and they can tax trade, as I said earlier. So they have the biggest taxing power. Municipalities, for example, and provinces have limited taxing power. Federal government has maximum taxing power. So they can tax anything, anywhere, anytime. And they can ask the provinces, they can rebel, but then the federal government can then say, I'm not going to give you transfer payments. And because transfer payments far outweigh those minor areas, generally the provinces get in line, which is why when you hear some province say, we're going to fund this particular health coverage and other provinces won't fund this other healthcare coverages, that's why they have a bit of a debate. But no, there's no jurisdiction and there's no power, and they can't say no. But the money does go to the federal government. Provinces receive a very small portion of what the federal taxes come in, for sure.
Just one more minute and then I'm done. Do we have to justify the taxes? In terms of taxes, I'll give an example. For example, you buy a car, you buy a vehicle, and you pay tax, which is quite hefty, 13%. I'm talking about Ontario, for example. Then you sell this car, you pay tax again, and you sell it again, and you pay again, and you sell it again, and you pay again. And this is endless process. How this tax on tax is justified? That's what I'm just curious.
So again, in fairness to my answer, I agree with you. I believe in an efficient, effective system. One of my slides was, what is livability? When the cost, I hold the view that the middle class is fastly becoming the impoverished class, and we're having a much larger tier system. And many people are saying they like it. I can't tell you enough of when I engage. I used to be a municipal councillor until a week ago Monday. I got defeated in the October 24th election. And when I went out, I engaged on a weekly basis with the business community. I'm one of the founding members of the Coalition of Business and Manufacturers of Ontario, for example. And I would listen to them, and they were saying, when we had meetings, the governor of Ohio would come with 5 of his people saying, guys, if you're sick and tired of paying high electricity prices, if you really want to be open for business, you want to come down here, we're here. And the premier would show up at our meetings because a big portion of the business community in Ontario would show up. And people were getting fed up. And the problem is, that are we increasing real wages? Since 1971, real income in Canada has not gone up. The cost of living has gone up disproportionately. The cost of governance, municipal governments in Southern Ontario, the best government in Southern Ontario since in the last 15 years, it costs to deliver snowplow services and garbage collection and grass cutting is 60% above inflation, highly, highly inefficient, because they administrate a guy doing grass cutting, and that cost is substantial. And nobody really cared. It was easy because in a deflationary state, cost of living went down. People said, I can absorb it. Well, many of us in this meeting may remember the 80s and 90s when interest rates were at 10, 15, 20. I can personally remember 24% interest. There's a generation of people who've never seen interest above 7%. And now we're in a situation of stress. And I think I mentioned sovereignty and quality of life and what is government, where are we going? And it saddens me that we're not talking about policy, that we're not talking about practicality, about livability, about competitiveness and productivity. Instead, people would rather talk about personality. I like the color of his hair. Look what they did here. And we don't have, unfortunately, my position here, sorry, I told you I agree with you, and somebody may disagree with me. I'm saddened that we have a communication vehicle, I'm going to call the media. In the 80s, when Mr. Cameron, who rests his soul, would have a journal on the CBC, and they would do investigative reporting for 30 minutes with Knowlton Nash and then Peter Manchbridge thereafter and Barbara Frum. That's not done today. Today we have Twitter world where it's 50 characters. We have people can say anything on an app and they assume it's true. And there's no possibility to defend yourself. I just said, I can show you ads that were put against me. They were utterly false. But I have to make a decision. I'm in court today on several fronts to defend my character and everything else. I know they've offered been settlements. By that point, the public already has an opinion. It's already, you Google me, you'll see lots of different things, all false. But what are you going to do about it? Right? So I share your view. I think we should have a government that matters. I think we should talk about livability. I think we should talk about being competitive. I think it should be a place for future generations. I think we should care about the families and middle class. But what can I tell you? Not everybody feels that way. And that's the joy of being politics, I guess, or those being in a political spectrum. And I'd like to think that we, the people, you mentioned the United States, I think we, the people, this type of organization who has a discussion about philosophical, cultural, dynamic, quality of life is real. And remember, we have such a great history in Canada. We joined the Second World War before the United States. We believed in protection of people's rights and freedoms. We believe in working in a peacekeeping nation where law matters and where people have justice, and we believe in equality, where we believe that there's a just cause, and we follow that type of concept. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way and the only way. There's different points of view. That's the nature of life. Sorry, go ahead.
My understanding that today we don't have any tangible mechanism to control federal government. Federal government can do whatever they want.
Called elections. It's called elections.
Yeah. Thank you.
And by the way, there's a majority and minority governments. We follow a parliamentary Westminster model, which means we have 338 members that represent all of Canadians, called members of parliament. And if you have more than 50% plus one in the House, you can control. So this past Monday in the province of Ontario, there was an omnibus bill, which meant a big bill that went forward, lots of things in it. And I can tell you guys in this call, I know it's being taped, but I'll tell you that on the weekend I was engaged, wasn't getting paid for it, but some of the people in the province said, hey, can you read this bill? Can you read that? Can you tell us this viewpoint, that viewpoint? And the entire weekend we were going through hundreds and hundreds of clauses and legally going through to making sure that those laws are being put in place. Didn't meet a charter challenge or a legal challenge, getting feedback, and they were asking my input because of my years of experience and because I'm a policy guy. I was giving a perspective on housing and feedback, and they made some adjustments, and it went through on Monday. So their engagement really does matter. It's not always an old boys club, and everybody can make a difference. And I can tell you, if I had told you that when Canada Post said they're going to stop door-to-door mail delivery, and I started to fight that as a resident, and fought and won. You know how many people said, you're going to fight Canada Post? You're going to fight the TTC? You? Ladies and gentlemen, there's a class action suit against people who downloaded movies on the internet. Sony is suing Canadians because somebody downloaded internet. And my group are the people they sued. So we're in federal court defending your right to download internet today. It's not a political stunt. We're just fighting hard. And we've won 4 times, cost us millions of dollars in legal. And here we are fighting for Canadians because I believe we charge too much internet pricing. So anyway, that's a whole other matter. It's not what I did for a living. But I'm gonna say to you, they call me Rob Ford on steroids. I'm a guy with a bone and gets my bone in it, and I fight like mad. And we will continue together to make a community that matters for our Canada. I'm a very, very proud Canadian, as I'd be willing to bet you the vast majority of people on this call are.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Henry, for the question. We have go back to Randy. He also has a very fascinating question. Yes, Randy?
Tom, it sounds like your name may appear on another ballot at some time over the next few years. I'm curious, oh, by the way, Paul Martin should have learned how to print money. That would have dealt with his issue. I'm curious about this land development tax. It's all over the news. I can see a certain logic between new homes and the infrastructure being built. One of the issues too is the ongoing maintenance fees, I would argue, are probably going to be larger in the long run, which will be supported by all of the tax base. But my question is it possible for municipal government to actually put on a surtax, a real estate surtax, like the land tax for say 5 years on just all developments over a certain period of time? In other words, taking what the development fees that the developers would have paid and sticking it on to the new home buyers. Like, is that within the remit of a municipal government?
So yeah, so I would love to talk about that a lot, but I won't lead the conversation. So the municipalities are governed today under the Municipal Act, and there's a subsequent act under that called the Planning Act. The truth is that when municipalities go rogue, and many municipalities have gone rogue, which is why the many governments have tried to move forward. So I'm going to give you a little history there. So the short answer to your question is land transfer tax is not within the jurisdiction of a local government. The province can delegate, and the local governments can request to our parent if we can get more or add, and the parent has to agree to it, but we cannot arbitrarily do that, which is why, it's really funny is in Richmond Hill, we're on a little island, people say, geez, you should tell the province what to do. Imagine a business unit in Canada going to a parent like Siemens in Germany saying, Mr. Siemens, we in Canada are going to tell you how to run your company. And people that do that generally don't survive their pay grade very, very long. But we have rebels in politics who simply do that. They're called NIMBYs, not in my backyard, and they simply municipalities are not following their guidelines or the requirements, and the province is going the other way. The province is, right now, there's a bill. They're saying, Mr. Municipalities, you were given the privilege of managing your own affairs, but because you've mismanaged it so badly, we're removing powers from you, and we are now going to direct you. Even worse, for municipalities that basically are not skilled or not willing to do their job, they basically are saying, hey, we're taking away taxation powers of park tax and development charge. If I can, let me just give you this quick overview. In 1971, the province of Ontario said Toronto, or I'm going to call it 416, is not going to handle all the growth. And I'm going to start there. I'm not going to go back into suburban growth in the 50s and 40s in Toronto, where the Don Way and Topico was going. But 1971, they're going to grow. And places like Richmond Hill, because I have a Richmond focus, I'm sorry, I had 33,000 people. And we said, oh my God, we can't handle this growth. Are you kidding? We're farms. 100% of those 33,000 people protested. And people in Richmond Hill says, we can't afford a police force. We can't afford transit. We can't do universal housing. So the province said, fine, we're going to create a conglomerate, a cooperative, another levels of government. And they created Peel region and Durham region, York region. York region is 9 municipalities, Markham-Vaughan, Richmond Hill, East Gwillimbury, Aurora, Newmarket, Whitchelston, King, for example. And what happened is they formed an alliance where 50% of your property tax dollar goes to York region for conglomerate housing, conglomerate policing, conglomerate transit, called York Region Transit, York Region Police, York Region Housing. 50 cents of every property tax dollar goes to York Region on those 3 items. So what happened is in 1971 that was created. In the late 90s, the province said, oh my God, you guys have sprawled to suburban mania away from farming more than we ever thought of. We need to protect the watersheds. And they created the Oak Ridge Moraine Conservation Plan in 2001, conservative government under Eves. And then they loved that idea and they said, oh my God, you know what? That Oak Ridge Moraine didn't protect all the watersheds. And by the way, real quick, Oak Ridge Moraine has 4 classifications: natural core, which is protection of water; natural link, which is protection of trees and wildlife; settlement, which is houses. There's houses on the Oak Ridge Moraine, believe it or not. Just one Leslie today. No old house, not new. And countryside, which is farms. In 2005, the province put forward the green belt. I call it the Donald Trump Wall of Green, from Niagara Falls to Rice Lake. And then the next year, Dalton McGuinty moved forward something called the Growth Plan. 16 years ago, said we're going to have an urban Ontario, a buffer zone called a green belt, and a rural Ontario. In order to have a place where we can grow and be transit oriented, there has to be 200 jobs and homes per hectare in urban or southern Ontario, with 50 being the minimum. 10 years after that, each municipality had to form its official plan. Richmond Hill did theirs in 2010. Now they're doing theirs now, required under the province, otherwise they never would. And then in 2016 into 2017, the Premier of the province, Kathleen Wynne, came to Richmond Hill and said, you know what, guys? We're not doing 200 jobs and homes per hectare. We're not doing 50 jobs and homes per hectare. You guys are at 30. You're at 60% of your minimum targets. What are you doing? And we had a huge housing trouble. And I'll tell you, people on the phone, I'm one of the people that contacted all municipalities in Ontario. She asked me to do it for a couple of weeks. I did. And I called all 444 municipalities in Ontario, and I found, do we have a vacancy? Do we have this people coming here and leaving homes vacant and living in other parts of the world? And the answer was no. We contacted all the municipalities in Ontario, asked what the water consumption was the last 40 quarters, and we found that there wasn't any houses en masse. There were some homes, but nothing on a market scale. She created the 15% value added tax, which was a shock to the system to bring housing prices down. And then she told municipalities, please do 80, not 50 jobs and homes per hectare, and build a transit-oriented community group. Municipalities didn't do it. There's no ramifications. They didn't meet their guidelines. 2018, the Premier changed to a Doug Ford government. Doug Ford said, maybe I should look at this Donald Trump Wall of Green. People said, oh my God, you're the developer's pocket. He said, whoa, I'm not doing that. In 2019, he said, I'm gonna grow inside, and now we have rooming houses. And each house, there's no such thing as a single family home in Southern Ontario anymore. Now you guys can have 2 occupancies in every shelter. And if you have a detached structure, there's a 3rd. So now you're going to see much more infill housing than you've ever seen before, which I'm diabolically opposed to, but that's another story. So municipalities have taxation powers on the Municipal Act following the planning guidelines, and the province assigns what we can do or not do, and they can at any time change things and they can remove taxation powers, remove municipalities, add municipalities, do whatever they're going to do. And that's what this is about. I don't want to take other people's time, but But if you want to talk more about that, I gladly will, but that's where it's at.
But Tom, is it just very quickly, it's not the land transfer tax I was referring to. My question was, could in Richmond Hill, could they say everything built after, let's pick a date, has a 10% surtax on their property tax for the next 5 years? So that any home built, say, after a certain date would have 5 years of a 10% surtax. Could the Richmond Hill do that? In other words, and what they do is
I gotta think. Let me think about that. I would say no, because that would be a punitive targeted tax and it would be challenged. We can do a universal tax based upon a universal policy. We would be able to choose winners or losers. You could do, the province gave us the opportunity to charge administration fees up front for new, but not retroactive. So the answer is no. We wouldn't, the Municipal Act and the Planning Act does not allow us to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No.
Okay, thank you, Randy. I see John Cummins wants to ask his fascinating questions. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, well, as per usual, I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, but when it comes to development policy and governments, it looks like there's a total lack of imagination. And I guess ultimately there's no one to blame except the government and maybe, the boogeyman always, the developers, because, they're looked at as special interests. But like I look at Ireland, and they seem to go about it much differently. Like they build rapid speed highway. They built rapid speed highways throughout the country. They're in the process of doing rapid speed train service to kind of empower smaller communities and have people leave Dublin and go live elsewhere, but make it possible to get back to Dublin in 40 minutes or 45 minutes. And like right now, you can get to Galway in 2 hours. It used to be 6 or 7 hours. In 5 years' time, it's going to be 1 hour by train. That's like, psychologically, that's like going from Toronto to Thunder Bay. Why isn't this happening in the country rather than this intensification of the GTA and all this nonsense? We're blessed with so much land and resources. So is that a federal lack of imagination or a provincial or a municipal?
So number one is, everyone knows, and again, I've got lots of opinions on topics. I just want to kind of stick to the facts and kind of give it back to you. For those that live in York region, you'll likely have seen an investment in these Viva system. There's a rapid transit up Yonge Street and a rapid transit on Highway 7, soon to be a rapid transit on Major Mackenzie, and there's one more, which I can't remember offhand. Anyway, do you guys, a lot of questions, for example, why would they build this ugly monstrosity in the center of the road away from the side? And oh, what a pain it is. And I hate driving on Yonge Street, and I live off of Yonge Street. The reason for that is because when transit increases, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, they turn that easily into a light rail transit and then into a subway at a fraction of the cost. So the infrastructure that's there today on a bus rapid transit, and the concept is very much like you. And in 2006, the province put forward a growth plan, and that growth plan was based upon an urban Ontario, Southern Ontario, a buffer zone, and a rural Ontario. Municipalities, by not buying in, created sprawl because they did not intensify at the level expected. In fact, they made it worse. Because they allowed 50 by 150 lots to continue for a number of years, they didn't intensify where it was supposed to have done and made land prices very expensive. And then they added further fees called development fees and parkland dedication fees and administration fees, to the point where an average home, an average home today, and again, there's a difference between low rise, mid rise, and high rise, but generally speaking, an average home today, 28% of the cost of a home is government taxation or cost of some sort. 12% is the revenue or margin for the builder. The builder actually makes less than half of what the government charges. Yet a lot of people think these homes went up in value. It's because government taxation and cost of land and building materials have gone through the roof. And now the building community has said to the investment community, they can't build, can't afford to build, even with high prices, and no one's qualifying. So what they've done is, if we bought into the growth plan and we had met our intensification targets, we wouldn't have the sprawl. One of the I don't want to get political, but I moved motions that are now becoming law by the province. I moved laws, someone said to me the other day, Tom, you're ahead of your time. You moved all this legislation, but the public is 10 years behind you, and they just don't realize it. I moved intensification. I don't like gridlock. I hate traffic. I hate traffic. So what I do is I said, if you're going to invest on transit corridors, how about having 0 parking spots? Forcing people to take scooters, forcing people to walk, forcing people to take transit, forcing people to have Uber, having ride share, creating these alternative methods, reducing people driving so they have this transit walkable livable area. It's very common in many places in the world, especially in cold climates. But if you have a suburban mentality where you want 2 and 3 cars per household, there it is. And just so everybody knows, the cost of an underground parking spot is $70,000 per spot. So when those building communities say, I'm going to charge you $25,000, $30,000, or $40,000, or $50,000, it's not profit. That's the cost of showing up the land, electrical, making sure the water table isn't there, liability, just huge amount of cost. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create that. Another little tidbit for you along that same plan. All of you, it's up there. Some of you may have heard about a highway called 413, which is a bypass up at the Bradford Exchange going across. Everybody may have said, oh yeah, you may have an opinion on that. Do you know what the government gave up in exchange for that? They gave up the sewer. The sewer up the Don Valley Parkway, or 404, that was taking water and sewer to its market, was canceled. And now you may have heard. So what happened is the Markham, Vaughan, and Richmond Hill are going to have to absorb the sewer capacity until that is built. East Gwillimbury, Newmarket, and Aurora will not have the sewer capacity to provide growth. It's not just a matter of having land and growing it. They simply don't have they don't have the transference, because north of Bloomington, everything flows to Lake Simcoe. Everything south of Bloomington flows to Lake Ontario. So you have to flow that, and that sewer capacity is burdened by those development communities. So, and another part of your question is, Doug Ford chose by himself to invest on transit. He has no regional monies yet, no local monies, and the federal government has not committed any funds. They're still studying it. They've talked about it, but no money. All this growth on transit is exclusively burdened right now by the province of Ontario. And that's never been done before. Usually it's a third federal, a third provincial, a third regional. It's not being done. So he's got some problems if there's high interest rates coming.
Okay, so Tom, if I understand you right, it's not a lack of imagination. It's opposition by the public and NIMBYism. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
There's no
There's
question.
lots of ideas. There's lots of ideas, good ideas. They've been put forth, but NIMBYism and public opposition is what the problem has been, not government, but the public. Is that what you're saying?
So I'm going to say to you that there's the question. If politicians only cater to the residential voter, and the residential voter says, I don't want changes to my neighborhood. Can you guys imagine in 1971, if the province had listened to the ratepayers to say, we have farms up here. There's no way we're having growth, forget it. And all those people have homes post 1971 who are now opposing growth. It's crazy. So what's really exciting, everyone on this call, I characterize myself as a YIMBY with a Y. Yes, in my backyard. Yes to jobs. Yes to growth. Yes to public transit. Yes to the environment. Yes to investment in schools. Yes to better hospitals. I am personally pissed off that no one's pissed off that we've got a hospital growth in Vaughan and a hospital in Markham. We have a York University going to Markham. Where's Richmond Hill? Where's the investment? Where did Honda go? And everyone's saying, well, it's okay because we're having it. And to me, it's just a total lack of political leadership. It's not personal about the people there now. I can tell you what I witnessed when I see Honda and Scholastic and Victaulic, when I see the hospital being gone, when I see York University and others going, it pisses me off. Obviously, because I want to see jobs and growth and local jobs. I don't want people driving to Mississauga to work, and or people going to Orangeville or Alliston. You know, I'd like to see have an opportunity in families to grow here if at all possible, so we can have that Dublin environment. We have such a dream in the Oak Ridges and Moraine. We have so much opportunity in our region, and it's about to change. Right now, you may have heard that the regional chair is not elected, got appointed this term, and there's a review of governance. And if you Google, if all of you Google, I hope you write this down, Google population of Richmond Hill in 2017, population of Richmond Hill in 2021, population of Richmond Hill in 2022. And I think what you think now, what you see, you're going to be remarkably not a growing community, declining, but the population says you're including because they're doing this building that's not happening. And as a result, the government is spending out of control, and it's unsustainable, in my opinion.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Then Sherman, and after Sherman, Shisher.
Well, Tom, I have a philosophical question to ask. When we are implementing public policy, should it be done by the principles of instrumental reason, or should it be done by the principles of democratic procedure? And the reason why I'm asking this question is that I'm referring to the proposed legislation by the provincial government, the Better Municipal Governments Act. So in other words, what should be more important, the efficient delivery services or the procedure by which we follow in a democratic government?
So I'm going to tell you the answers. I'm going to give you two answers. First of all, I think both. I think as I mentioned when I go to the Sky Dome, if we simply follow processes, when you look at bylaws and you see bylaw number 71-123, that means that bylaw was in 1971. It's the 123rd bylaw. How many bylaws we have since 1971? Because that's when the region and we grew here. That's 50 years ago, and there's been no evolution in that. Can you imagine if I tell you, do you guys realize what a car was like in 1971 with a chrome bumper and the LTD and the spaces? Think about industry as a whole. You know, those of you who know laminate flooring, and now it used to be arborite laminate countertops. So government can't be innovative because they follow process, and by the time they fix the process, it's time consuming and expensive. So you need a system. You need a system. You need a system that is following guidelines, that has a due diligence, that has a good concept, but is also be able to manage in a manner that's going to be effective to allow productivity and performance, so that we can have a quality of life that's in today's reality, not in the past. And for those people that live in the past, it's problematic if we always think that that's going to be the future in some
Okay,
cases.
but does that mean that we decide democratic principles in order for the effective, efficient, cost-effective delivery of services?
I think we need a sober second thought. So I'm going to say to you that when a new innovation or product comes forward that's proven, you don't need to be innovative to the point where you're standalone patent. But if you find a process that works in the jurisdiction of Boston or the jurisdiction of Florida, why aren't we considering it here within some reasonable time frame? And I'll give you an example of that. In reality, I moved legislation here when I was a councillor in Richmond Hill called permeable pavers. That meant that when you have grass and water goes on that grass, the water goes into the grass, into the soil, and into the water table. When you pave over that grass, that water goes onto the grass, goes onto the street and into the sewer. And everyone says, well, it's free. Well, it's not free. The capacity of that sewer doesn't exist. And what happens is if you get a weather event, even a standard weather event, it may not be able to handle the capacity. Well, the state of California, the state of Florida, the city of Mississauga, Toronto, Ottawa, copied the motion. Nobody in York Region did it, yet you see people widening their driveway. And every time somebody widens their driveway and that water goes down there, there is a cost. You don't see it, and that's why now you're going to see it in years. I see it now. People are calling me today, even though I'm not in government. The amount of people that are calling me, it's unbelievable. And
Okay, so are we saying then, I have to repeat the point because this is the government's proposed legislation, that if the municipality wishes to pass a bylaw that reflects a provincial government policy, it can do so with only 1/3 of the members' support.
No, 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 no,
longer
no,
need
no, no, no,
50%.
no, what it says, no,
No,
careful.
I'm actually reading right from the,
Yeah, but no, I know, but I know you're reading it too, but let's be clear. So what you're talking about is mayor powers of
Yes.
Ottawa and Toronto, and it might be extended. What they're saying is if the head of council, if 2/3 of council disagree or agree to a certain concept, there can be no emperor or mayor power. But if the mayor with at least 1/3 of the representatives of council, if the mayor or the head of council, we can discuss what a mayor is. I call it the head of council because they represent council. So if the majority of council at 2/3 disagree or have a vision, then that vision will stand up. Again, I'm not telling you what I like or don't like. The legislation says if the mayor with 1/3 support or more, they can then move planning criteria that meets provincial guidelines. And I'm going to say to you, this is another question coming right back at you, is that I'm in favor of working collaboratively with other levels of government to reach shared goals. And when we have one business unit or several business units working opposed to the parent company, I'm going to say to you, I don't want a Nortel. I don't want a Research in Motion. I don't want to have a situation where you're stuck in a certain mantra. The reality is, again, if we don't want to grow, the growth plan of 2006 under Dalton McGuinty, municipalities have been opposed to because they've only met 70% or 30% for the last 15 years. Municipalities have not in Southern Ontario met its growth. Yet the people who achieved that growth from 1971 to certainly 2004, those people that moved into those areas or have those developments or that growth in that area, they're saying life worked great for me. And that's where life stopped. In 2004, life stopped, I'm here, woohoo. And I say to you, shame on us. Once again, our record. We have the least number of homes and jobs per capita on the planet.
okay, I understand that, but the
It's a problem.
issue is.
We're in a
okay,
crisis.
but I'll end this, but it's a philosophical question. What counts more, instrumental reason or democratic principles? That's the question I want to
I
ask.
think, but I'm going to say to you, I believe bureaucratic principles should be based upon on evidence-based decision-making, working within guidelines. I say to you, I'll give you an example, Richmond Hill. Think about this. In 2010, I got first elected in 2014. This predates me. In 2010, the official plan of Richmond Hill said 30% of all new homes can be a one-bedroom apartment or it could be a mansion, okay? 30% of all homes are to be affordable in 2010. If you look at the record of the housing cost versus income of 2010 versus 2021, you'll see things dramatically different. A huge failure. Yet people are saying it worked for me because they didn't follow the guidelines of 2016, 17, 18, and I bought my house under these people that were irresponsible. Do you guys realize that in the key development area, which is the highest densest area in New York region at Bernard and Young, in 2010, that official plan was in place. But in 2017, we built townhouses. If you build townhouses, Young and Eglinton, is that responsible, good planning? Well, that's what we did in Richmond Hill. As a result, we sprawled and it makes more traffic, more intensification, higher cost, makes government less efficient, it raises taxes, it hurts the green belt. Sprawl is the worst thing you can do. And when people start promoting sprawl and they start substantiating sprawl, and then later on they say, geez, what are the ramifications for our watersheds? What are the ramifications for families? What are the ramifications for the environment? What are the ramifications for real income and people in gridlock? What does it mean when California in 2030 goes to net zero and everybody goes electrical? What's going to happen to our electrical grid when people live up north and they can't travel to Mississauga and back on a green car with Tesla? I mean, it just doesn't work. And I'm telling you, less than 10 years. Yeah, people say, don't do anything. I want to remind you, in 1971, the Highway 407 was designed, built in 1996, 25 years later. We go through and, do you know, they built a hospital during COVID in 3 weeks in Germany, 2 weeks in China. We couldn't do anything here because we couldn't get through an environmental assessment. Our system, when you say to me, we can stick to our systems, but when they're unaccountable, inefficient, and they hurt the public and they hurt our quality of life, I'm going to say to you, be very careful, because our sovereignty and our way of life and everything that we have here in our young country of law, order, peace, and good government might be going in the toilet because we're putting restrictive covenants in place. I'm all in favor of process. I'm all in favor of finding guidelines. I'm all in favor of working together. But when you use it as a weapon and of restrictive covenants, when the end result is worse, I say to you, what are you saying? People with $1 million mortgage, the bank rate this year was 0.25% on January 1. Bank rate right now is 3.75 going to 4.25. If somebody had $1 million mortgage on a variable rate, they can't afford a $60,000 and $70,000 interest payment. Right now, there's 16 homes a day. 16 homes a day, the banks are evicting people out of their homes 7 days a week in Richmond Hill today. You guys don't see it because in the 90s when they had bank rate, everybody was laughing because we had 25 years of greatness. Families are hurting. Alberta says, you know what, you want to buy a 1,800 square foot brand new home, $765, you can have it here in Calgary. And people are divesting. And you likely know people are going to the East Coast in Alberta. Do you want Ontario divestment? The white Anglo-Saxon family gone in Ontario? I'm going to say to you, shame on us. Shame on us.
Yeah.
For
So,
our,
Tom, I think
our generation destroying it.
Tom, I think we get your passion, and I think also, Sherman, like your questions are very much to the point. Shasir is waiting to weigh in. Perhaps we could do that.
Yep,
yeah. So thanks very much, Sherman and Tom, for that exchange. It was very useful. Shasir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John, and welcome, Tom. We're very happy to hear you give us a little overview on politics and history in Canada. And you reminded us of the explosion that your plant created in Concord, which shook my plant and gave me a heart condition for which I need to look for a good lawyer now. Just kidding. Which, having said that, I really wanted to kind of take this much more to a commentary as opposed to asking a question. Overall, in a philosophical point of view, governance by democracy has got its value. And though it is cumbersome and clunky and bureaucratic and slow, it still compares so much better than the alternatives that we see in the world around us. So I feel that there is definitely a kicking of the can going on. There's definitely a reason for you to get passionate about it. And we all realize that we all should be taking role and part in how the governance is done in this country. Having said that, the inefficiencies that we see around us are reflected as much in the apathy of the citizens who are unwilling to participate in the government process. And let me just make sure that is not going over anybody's head. 30% of the population voted in the regional elections, 30%. So it would have taken 2,000 votes for somebody to have been elected, 2,000 votes. Now, somebody who's got a following of 5,000 people on social media could very easily have taken that seat. And somebody who may or may not even be qualified to be taking and doing that job. So these are some of the realities of the overgovernance, the bureaucracy, and the slow-moving ways in which our processes work. As you said, your route to get to downtown could really have been via Montreal. So this is the way we need to be able to readjust our thinking and understand the system that we operate within and how best to curtail some of the inefficiencies that we see, because nothing beats democracy, as we've been told over and again. I think it was Churchill who said, despite all its problems, there is still not a better system around. On the other hand, Reagan said, if your doorbell rings and the man outside the door says to you, I'm here from the government, here to help you, he said, run for your life. Am I right? This is it. This is the problem with the perception of the government and how does it give back to its population. The social contract that we have was for the government to provide us a middle class and even distribution of wealth so that people do then thrive and create another period of enlightenment. another period where people thrive. What have we seen? We're not seeing any of that. What we are seeing, on the other hand, is a disparity between the rich becoming richer, paying no taxes, and on the other hand, the poor who work 2 jobs, 3 jobs, are having difficulty finding any welfare. And it was Ralph Nader who said, a country that has justice does not require charity. And I speak, having sat on the board of Heart and Stroke Foundation for many years, I know that charity is the last resort. If a government is efficient and if the government is functioning as it should, we should not have a need for people to go beg for mercy. With that said, I really would love to see more engagement by public in government. I would certainly love to see politicians pay more regard to the population as opposed to their jobs. And once those priorities are fixed, I think we may have a better chance of governing this beautiful country of ours in a better way. Thank you.
So if I may, real quick, I agree with you 100%. I have offered all of my colleagues a discussion in 1991. I went to Waterloo. I was going to school at York University, and I saw a debate against the top economists and Bob Rae. I'll never forget that debate. And I drove in a snowstorm, an hour and a half to get there. And I watched a really great debate about free trade. And I heard a big difference between, I said left and right, and it wasn't ideological. It was really fun to watch. And Bob Rae won the debate. John, I remember the economist, I forgot his name. Anyway, I'm going to say to you, the problem is that there's no, I said it in my discussion, it's my opinion that social media has really hurt us because we have Twitter syndrome. People only want 50 characters and people make commentary, and the commentary is so misguided without fact and substance and concept that it doesn't allow for a pragmatic discussion so that we can make hard choices on complex topics of governance. One of the things, I'm not sure if I took it away from my slide or not, but one of the slides I had, and maybe an earlier version, I'm not sure if it was here today or not, but I said, you know, when you put forwards on a concept, does a government look after the whole on every topic, or does it stay focused? And what does it mean to, are we ideological driven on every topic? You know, municipal elections just came by and people would ask me all sorts of topics, and I have all sorts of positions, both from a policy perspective, a history perspective. But I said to him, really, I'm not here to talk to you about Iran and what's happening in Iran, or what I like or don't like that government. It's beyond my pay grade. It's not what I do. It's not why I'm here. And I really don't think it's going to help us in what we're trying to achieve. I had people say, I don't want smoking in schools. Well, I don't like smoking. Well, I like smoking or don't like smoking. Sorry, it's not allowed, and it's against the law, and I'm not going to sanction it. Well, you just lost my vote. Other politicians will say, I'll do anything to get a vote. It depends your pragmatism on what you think our government should be. I believe it to be a test of faith. I believe a good thing. I believe for those that are, say, there should be term governments, for example, another topic. I believe that's where the public has an opportunity to say, you know what, we want a new vision. 30% failure is a failure in all of us, but I take it principally my fault. One of the reasons we have this kind of engagement, again, the fact that you guys, I don't know if I said thank you to you that you're here, it was on my slide, I just may have forgotten to say it, but I really do appreciate John and Ella doing this today. I do so as a Canadian, I do so as a human being, that we can have this thoughtful discussion here another day in a bar. They took me to this great place by our office. I was this great fajitas. I was so happy because I was a little late today. It's such great to be Canadian. I'll just tell you a little story. In 1989, I was working at the largest commercial sports facility in Europe. We had a dome, a sky dome in Europe where Court 1 shut down, whatever else. I got called in a loudspeaker. And a loudspeaker in Germany in those days was a very bad thing. People got very nervous when they heard things on the loudspeaker. I got called down to the office and said, Mr. Muench, these two big gentlemen with blue suits were there. And they said, Mr. Muench, are you German, you Canadian? I said, well, I carry 2 passports. My parents were German when I was born. I'm in Germany. I said, well, all of our younger people do an 18-month military exercise. I said, well, I'm Canadian. They said, well, will you be going to Canada? So I'm leaving Saturday. This was Thursday. And 2 days later, I left Germany to come back to Canada. And they said, when will you be coming back to Germany? I said, not anytime soon. And I never went back until 2012, when on September the 13th, they removed conscription in Germany. So I dodged the draft in Germany, truth be told, to come back to Canada. And, long story, but I'm going to say to you, answer your question, engagement is all of our responsibility. I believe our political leaders have a responsibility to engage in good topics. One of the questions were here, which was tough because people are saying, Mr. Municipal Government, fight the federal government, fight the provincial government. We're supposed to be partners in executing what their will is. And we put official plans in place that they authorize and we're not producing. What are the ramifications of us not meeting it? To give you guys one last, and again, I know Johnny got to go, but I'm going to say this. In 2001, the city of Richmond Hill approved 2,321 building permits, 2,300 building permits in 2001. In 2019, pre-COVID, the city of Richmond Hill, you think that number was higher, the same, or lower? The answer was 844. And where did those families go? Innisfil, Barrie, London, Cobourg. And people said, that's good. Well, the problem is as we sprawled and as we didn't approve the right housing in the right places and didn't work within our official plan, there are ramifications to the point we're in a housing crisis and we need to talk about that housing crisis. And I can't talk about it. We can't talk about it. I'd love to say, here, I'll give it to all of you. Here are your 9 options. There's going to be one of them. Which ones do you want, or a combination thereof? That's not even open because people get partisan. They set their lines in the sand. Some people are a little more selfish than others, may not have context. And the reality is we're hurting future generations. But we are living beyond our means. Housing cost is going to go down. Housing inflation is here. We have cost of real inflation. The cost of living is down. Family values are down. There's no sovereignty. And who's discussing? Here's a little tidbit for you. Those of you that hope, maybe some of you remember, there's something called Walkerton, tainted water. We have tainted water in Richmond Hill today. There are people at Jefferson and Yonge that can't drink their water. Why? Because the water table is contaminated. Because we contaminated it. Instead of fixing it, we said we'll bring bottled water in. And we put it under the radar, and the public and the government didn't want to discuss it. Shame on us. Anyway, so yes to engagement, yes to democracy, yes to the duration of jobs, yes to livability. Yes, I agree with you, 30% is bad. Yes, I'm responsible. My fault.
Okay, great. Yes, thanks, Tom. We have to go to the next question. Richard, are you ready?
Yeah.
And then Rob after that.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Good presentation. In your presentation, you mentioned that government provides significant economic and cultural direction. I come from China. We know China has 13 years quick economic development. In this process, just because Chinese government loses control for the economy, and so the mainly economic have the result, have quick development. And in other words, if government sometimes engage or involve in some economic activities, the consequences must definitely is the disaster, is a failure. So my question is, could you give me some example how to Canadian government play role in the economic direction, like you mentioned? And also, I really curious, that actually is the debate. The government, with better, the government is a small government or the big government, with better. This could be related to some democratic government, democracy system. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, as I understand, the economic direction of China, the differences between having an autocratic government and a democratic government. Sometimes when you have an emperor government or a smaller government, or you have a government, I would say to you, in Canada, in democratic will, we have a majority government and the government can move forwards. I just mentioned on Monday, they moved an omnibus bill and they allowed consultation quickly. And then they moved it within, openly in a discussion that was open to be tabled inside of 2 weeks. And they moved legislation and others are supposed to follow. So majority governments, or when you get a majority of a house in a democratic way with will, we can move forwards quite quickly. And as was been proven with some fanfare, when the province says, I'm going to move forwards with a new highway, I'm going to move forwards with ministerial zoning orders, which are going to make arbitrary direction, superseding a long process. Some people say, how dare you do insulting to that process? The government has said, we're taking responsibility, we're taking leadership, we have a will of the House, and we're moving forwards. And if down the road people say, how dare you do that, and we're not going to forget, and they vote out that government in years down the road, that's how they're held accountable. So the good news about a democratic approach is when you get the majority of the House, that'd be a minority majority government, and they have resolve, they can make laws and they can be held accountable that aren't autocratic for generations to come. And that to me is progressive, allows progressive. But I will say to you, it'd be irresponsible and naive to say that democratic governments are more efficient and effective when an autocratic government can pull people aside to say, we see a need, we're moving forwards, get it done tomorrow. We see a hospital that needs done. We couldn't build a hospital in Ontario. We didn't handle COVID to the best of ability to improve productivity. Our productivity in this province is shameful. Investment infrastructure isn't here. We're relying on foreign people to come in here for our growth. We're not having domestic growth. That's negative. There's no way of getting around that. So there's pros and cons to both. I would say to you, I'm obviously a fan of democratic, which is why I live here. And by me engaging on the weekend, I was very honored when people engaged someone with me and said, hey, we'd like to have your opinion, without giving proprietary information away. They showed me respect. They moved forward with the omnibus bill. And I take pride in that type of government, regardless of partisan. Kathleen Wynne in 2017 asked me to do a study on housing affordability. So it's not liberal, conservative, or in that way. But we do need to be better. And I think that's why we're evolving. And this kind of conversation, and I'm going to say to you that immigration and having multiple cultures is a good thing because we get a context and a framework and a language and a culture that can evolve our country. But we do need to have basic resolves and basic parameters. I carry in my car Yahtzee, backgammon, and cards, and I play euchre and hearts almost every week at every bar, encouraging people to play and learn to try to keep our, my view of culture going. So there's no perfect solution. Our economic development, our red tape is a problem. Our current research and development in Canada is very poor. We have less research and development going into our market than anywhere else in the Western world. That's a problem. Our productivity in terms of workers is poor. That's a problem. So, but we have to continue to work on it. No question.
I know Chinese government have a very concrete plan for the annual budget every year. But I really want to know, Canadian government also have this plan, federal?
Yeah, both Ottawa has a majority, and in the province of Ontario where I reside, they both have majority governments. And if you look on where for example, our senior care, 4 years ago, there was no senior portfolio in Ontario. Right now, there's a minister with a senior, and they handled immediately $2 billion in expenditures on the throne speech. And the $2 billion in the seniors is no, it may not seem like a lot of money, but it's a nice start. They've partnered with others and they've moved forwards quite quickly. So they've recognized senior problem, they've recognized some housing crisis, they've declared it, they've stopped. Think about it. the night before an election in York Region, Durham and Peel, they stopped the election to appoint. So there is progress of a dictatorship, if that's what I call it, but on a majority based upon resolve of provincial matters, of which we're all supposed to be striving to work collaboratively, in my view. So it's not like we got our head in the sands. We are making progress. You know, there's some files I just mentioned that I know that are taking place, and we can do better, and we are going to get better. But we need to work together to make sure that we hold government accountable, make sure that we get the priorities done, and reward government for doing those priorities where possible. And of course, when we're pissed off from some of the files, we have to do on balance what's the best interest of our and the next generation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, perfect, Tom. Thanks. We have Rob next one, and sorry, Ivan, we don't have time for your question.
Come on, come on.
Thanks.
That was a joke.
Thanks, Ella.
No, Ala, I don't have a question. I'm going to bring up a couple of things from the chat.
I know
I'll
that
keep
was
it
a
quick. I'll
joke.
keep it quick,
But
John.
that has to be the last one for sure. Yeah.
I'll keep it quick.
Okay.
I'll keep it
Yeah.
quick.
No, take.
It's
Yeah, yeah.
picking me up, basically, is what it boils down to.
I sent a little joke
I
to
got to
John.
start. If I'm going to keep it quick, I got to start. Thanks, Tom, for your presentation. Appreciated it. And especially the levels of government. I was interested in the regional levels of government. It's kind of the hidden level, the unknown level of government. And as you pointed out, we pay 50% of our property taxes, I guess, toward the regional government. And I guess just sort of in keeping with a lot of the points that were raised tonight, we were talking about government transparency. There was a lot of questions about democracy, and especially a lot of questions about voter engagement, voter turnout, voter awareness. And I would add to that sort of candidate awareness, candidate for, all levels of municipal government, local councillors, regional councillors. But my question is based on, I've been frustrated that the property taxpayers have not had a vote on who becomes regional chair. It's been appointed, or it's not appointed, it's been elected by the regional councillors. And I've been, always disappointed on that, because I think it's hurtful on all those points: transparency, democracy, voter engagement, candidate engagement. I really think it's been hurtful. And I just want to know what's your, I know 4 years ago, they were talking about doing that. They were talking about the property taxpayers getting to have a vote on the regional council. And I was enthusiastic, but it never came to pass. But anyhow, what's your position on the property taxpayers having a vote on the regional council for all those reasons, transparency, et cetera?
I love the idea of an open, transparent, and let voters decide, assuming that voters were engaged at a 30% voter turnout.
That's what I'm talking about, getting the voter engaged, giving them that exciting option. Councillor.
We had a mayor election. Usually mayor elections bring out people because people feel closer. I can tell you, so full transparency, when last Wednesday, the province said that they're going to abolish the elections of regional chair, people were spending weeks of lobbying to try to get the voting at region level for their colleagues. We just came after municipal election. Had there been a voter election for the regional chair, which was the case in 2018 before Premier Ford canceled it and then said no, and this time he elected as chair. I do know some of the inside information as to why they did what they did, and I'm going to tell you it's a good reason why they did it. I don't believe that the people of York Region, Peel, and Durham really understand the complexity of government and what the role of the chair is. But the fact that our regional representatives, so for those that don't know, Richmond Hill got, in 1971, said, we get more population than Aurora. So we got 2 additional representatives. Every mayor of a representative municipality becomes a voting member. And then Richmond Hill got 2 additional representatives because we had more population. And Vaughan says, well, we have more than Richmond Hill. We gave them 3, or Toronto, or Ontario gave them 3. And then Markham got 4. And then this past year, region allowed yet another representative in Vaughan. So now Richmond Hill has 2 additional representatives, 3 total. Vaughan has 4 + 1, 5. Markham has 4 + 1 is 5. So the balance of power is Markham, Vaughan, and Richmond Hill.
Thanks, Tom. I'll let John get his question in because we're running
Okay.
up. Thanks, Tom.
Yep. Go,
John.
John.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. That good questions and good answers. Yeah, all I wanted to do was there are people put a couple of things in chats, and I thought we would just chat things.
Go.
The first one is from Henry way back, and Henry says, quote, fascism is, let me give his, and then I'll give the second one, which is from Dr. Rabbi. So Henry said, fascism is an extreme left ideology, and obviously he's perfectly correct, there's no doubt about that. I don't get why people think otherwise. And, I guess the question that arises out of that, why do people think otherwise? The other one is from Dr. Rabi, who's still with us today. And she asked the question, what factors affect government, tax allocation, and how is it determined? Now, obviously, that's a very big question as well. Both of them very big questions. But what are your two immediate reactions to those two things?
Canada is moving left because if you think about our immigration, there are people who are immigrating here who are used to a way of life, and they bring that way of life and that culture here.
Yeah.
And so there's a concept in our young history to say, hold an election by talking about the middle to left, but govern right. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened in recent years, but the reality is that people want a free lunch, and they're expecting that socialist approach, and that's a trend that's happening. Number two, with regards to, again, that's the way it is. Number two is the factors of how government prioritizes its budgets and its money. Two things. One, the way that government works in reality, each department has its own silo. And once you get a base budget, that base budget continues forevermore, and that usually increases, never decreases. So once a government puts a program in place, that program doesn't go away after a period of time. So what happens is the government is getting bigger and wider, plus there are some priorities. It's very rare when you have points in time like 1995, when our finance minister went to New York, the 2008 bank crisis that forced governments, and I believe, to answer your question, I believe governments are forced to do something when they're told to, otherwise they just don't, because nobody cares what happens in 4, 10, or 15 years from now. And I think what's going to happen is if interest rates continue to climb and our high debt continues and our productivity falls, I think the bondholders are going to be dictating to Canada in the not so distant future, and we're going to lose the opportunity to govern. So I think this is why the province and some of our federal government are going to be forced to act on priorities of healthcare, seniors, electricity, transit, and are going to make a difference. So I think that's where it's coming. But right, to answer your question, governments get to choose whatever they want, however they want, and whatever the public tells them what they feel is in their best interest politically.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That's great.
Okay, I think we have to wrap it up. And I cannot express the amount of gratitude from the API, from me personally, from John Smithen, and from everyone in our virtual room, for Tom for taking time from his busy schedule and presenting this provocative presentation. I hope everyone would agree with me. I hope in a positive way, but like philosophy, it's about challenging minds. And I kind of, in a way, Tom definitely did that. And definitely, we had a very philosophical discussion about our everyday political issues. And as I said before, that politics is a big part of philosophy, and philosophy part of politics. So thank you again, and hope to see you next time. Thanks, Tom, again.